This is a fish that walks. This species of fish evolved over millions of years to be able to survive out of the water. It's called a mudskipper. Mudskippers are a special kind of fish that live right on the edge of the ocean, where the land and water meet. They can do things that feel impossible for a fish. They can crawl and hop across wet mud using their fins, spend long stretches out of the water, and even breathe air as long as their bodies stay moist. They live in coastal mudflats and mangrove areas, places where the tide floods the ground and then pulls away again. The mudskipper's world is constantly switching between land and water. But why does the mudskipper exist? Millions of years ago, far before humans existed, the coastlines of Earth were a busy place. The warm oceans pushed up against muddy shores. The tides rose and fell every day slowly. Along many tropical coasts, especially near mangrove forests, which contain trees that grow in salty, swampy water, the ground wasn't sand like a beach. It was thick, sticky mud because of the slow tide. To most animals, this muddy world looked gross and pointless, too wet to be land, too shallow to be ocean. But to small fish living near the shore, it was a place full of opportunity. Back then, the great ancestors of mudskippers were ordinary little fish, similar to fish you can still find today in shallow coastal waters. They had gills for breathing underwater and fins for swimming. Their lives were mostly simple: hide from predators, eat small food, and survive long enough to have babies. But nature is always experimenting. No one plans evolution. Instead, random differences appear in each generation, and the fish that fit their environment best survive more often. Over time, those helpful differences become more common. Near the shore, the environment was harsh but rewarding. The water in tidal flats was often shallow, warm, and crowded. Sometimes it didn't move much, which meant the oxygen in the water could run low. On top of that, the tides didn't always cooperate. When the tide pulled away, the water could disappear completely, leaving behind puddles, wet mud, and stranded creatures. Most fish avoided these places, but some small fish, especially the bold ones, started venturing into these areas anyway. Why? Because the mud was basically a free buffet. It was packed with tiny animals like worms, crabs, insects, and algae. And when the water was low, there were fewer big fish predators around to swallow them whole. At first, these fish weren't walking. They were just surviving. They might swim into a shallow patch and get stuck in mud for a moment, or they might end up in a shrinking puddle as the tide went out. Most would struggle. But a few had little advantages. Maybe their bodies handled low oxygen better. Maybe they could keep their gills moist a bit longer. Maybe they were stronger and could flop their way to deeper water. Those small differences mattered a lot in a place as extreme as the tidal zone. And the fish that survived those tough moments became the fish that got to reproduce. Over many generations, life in the tidal flats pushed these coastal fish toward a strange new skill: spending time out of water. A normal fish can't do this for long because gills don't work well in air, they collapse and dry out. But these shoreline fish slowly improved at keeping their gill area wet and usable, like carrying a built-in life support system for a short time. Little by little, their bodies favored gill chambers that could hold moisture and stay puffed, but even that wasn't enough. Fish that could absorb oxygen in other ways, through moist skin and the inside of the mouth and throat, were the ones that ultimately survived. Mudskippers today aren't exactly lungfish, but they are amazing at breathing air in a fish-style way, as long as they stay wet. As they spend more time exposed to air, a new problem became obvious: drying out. Out on the mud, the sun could be strong, and the wind could steal moisture fast. A fish that dries out is a fish that does not survive, so mudskipper ancestors that stayed in wetter areas, learned to hide, or could keep their bodies moist, had an edge. Eventually, one of the biggest survival upgrades appeared: burrowing. Mudskippers dig into the mud to create safe tunnels and chambers. These burrows help them avoid heat, avoid predators, and stay damp. They even use them for reproduction, turning the muddy ground into a kind of underground home. But perhaps the most famous part of the mudskipper story is movement. If you're going to live in the zone between sea and land, you need a way to travel when the water vanishes. At first, it wasn't elegant. The early almost mudskippers probably flopped around like awkward little living noodles. But every time one fish flopped a bit better than another, reaching a puddle, escaping danger, finding food, or winning a territory, it improved its chances of survival. Over time, the best floppers became something new. Their fins became stronger, their muscles improved, and their bodies gained better control. Instead of only paddling in water, their front fins began acting like crutches. Mudskippers today plant their fins into the mud and push and pull themselves forward, sometimes skipping and hopping. It's not walking like a dog, it's more like a combination of crawling, scooting, and tiny jumps, but it works beautifully on mud. As mudskippers became more land active, their senses had to keep up. Vision underwater and vision in air aren't the same. Underwater, a fish can rely on water supporting its body, and many fish have eyes placed on the sides of the head. But a creature moving on mud needs to see above the surface to spot predators, rivals, and food. Over time, mudskippers evolved their famous bulging eyes that sit high on their heads like little periscopes. This allowed them to look around while staying low to the ground. Their eyes also adapted for better use in air, and mudskippers developed behaviors to keep their eyes moist, almost like a fish's version of blinking. And this is where the story gets even cooler. Evolution didn't just shape their bodies, it shaped their behavior too. Mudskippers aren't passive fish drifting around. They are active, dramatic little characters. They defend territories. They chase rivals. Some even display like tiny dinosaurs, raising fins and posturing. They time their lives around the tides, knowing when to feed, when to retreat, and when to guard their burrows. Their survival strategy became a full lifestyle, built around the rhythm of the ocean breathing in and out every day. So, mudskippers weren't created in one big leap. They are the result of many small advantages stacking up over huge stretches of time. Fish that handled low oxygen better, fish that stayed moist longer, fish that could survive short times on land, fish that could push themselves across mud, and fish that could see and fight and hunt above the waterline. Each improvement was aimed at survival, winning in a very specific battlefield, the tidal flats, where land and sea constantly trade places. Nature only cares about survival. Mudskippers are fish that turned the in-between world into their home, breathing air without true lungs, moving across mud without true legs, and thriving in a place that most creatures can't handle. Why they exist is simply the product of needing to survive over millions of years, because survival is all that matters. As a result, if you ever see a mudskipper throughout your travels around the world, know that it took a lot for them to be where they are today. Thanks for watching. I would love for you to follow along on my content journey, so please subscribe and watch one of these videos on screen if you're able to. If not, I look forward to meeting again in the future.